The Jeffersonian principle is that politicians and people are supposed to go to Washington on a temporary basis. Washington is supposed to be this temporary place. It's now got sports teams. It's now got huge infrastructure. It's got systems like a city, and now they're saying we should be a state because we have so many people. That's not the design of Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is supposed to be the place where you go temporarily to make laws, and then you leave that place and you go home and live under those laws. We have a system right now where the media control it because they live there, and they switch from the New York Times to Politico to the Washington Post to CNN, and all around they just stay in that system and they protect their own. And so I think it's a real problem. And by the way, term limits is not going to solve it. You talk a lot about the deep state.
Trump talks a lot about the deep state. And yet when a lot of us talk about the deep state, people say, oh, this is a conspiracy theory. This is made up. It's not really a thing. There's no way to define it. So when I say deep state to you, what does that actually mean?
I think to me what it means is that there's this system in Washington, D.C., the federal government system, that basically takes care of its own, because what really is a problem, and I think it's a developing problem, we're no longer at the point, Dave, where it's Republican versus Democrat. This is now Washington versus the rest of America.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club.
And what I would say that the deep state is this system in Washington that protects its own, and that means that they float from one agency to another. They're dependent upon the federal government. The media that lives there is dependent upon Washington, D.C. being large and big and powerful. And when Republicans or outsiders like Donald Trump come in and say, you know what, let's shrink this, let's cut this, let's change this, there is this rise up of people protecting their city, protecting the state that they have
So I actually wanted to get to this
up
a little later, but I think it's the right segue. Can you talk about how that system then is linked to the mainstream media? How every article that comes out in the New York Times that is supposedly in a classified meeting suddenly gets to the New York Times first, and then CNN and the rest of it, how they're actually working in cahoots?
So there's this institutional system, right? Go to the same parties, they go to the same church, they live on the same block, they see each other at the post office. The relationships begin to be incestuous, and you take care of each other because you're fighting for Washington. So when the media, it's one aspect of it. But if you limit the politicians' terms to 6 years or whatever, you're giving more power to the bureaucracy and to the deep state because they're there. And the person who just cycles out is the politician that's the name on the door, and the power becomes those staffers. Now one solution, because I want to always talk about solutions, is that we need to move some of this bureaucracy out into the Midwest, into the rest of the Why country. Is it when there's a problem, when there's a crisis, we shouldn't have everything based in Washington, D.C. that's not healthy. And so is there a way to start moving parts of the bureaucracy to Kansas, to Missouri, to Colorado, to some of the other places where then the people who are making these decisions and living in the neighborhoods have more American values than Washington, D.C. values?